So just to start things off, so the idea is to give everyone an opportunity. We'll get some more questions from the audience, and then we'll just kick off a little bit of a conversation. And I guess one of the interesting, there's been a whole variety of themes, which I know Malcolm's been capturing all day long. I like the panicked look on your face there. But you know, there have been a lot of different things. One of the things that sort of struck me throughout the day was, you know, coming from a public policy background, was that there wasn't much of a discussion of the role of power relationships. And at our last conversation in 2024, here you go, Beth. We talked a lot about ethics and power relationships, and you know, in the context that we live at the moment, you know, the role of the tech companies, the role of government. It's become very clear that there's a situation where individuals are relatively powerless or feel relatively powerless vis-a-vis tech companies and also respect to their governments, but also just a feeling of lack of agency over their futures. So in that context, would you have, from your different perspectives and the points of view that you have, how do we deal with those power imbalances, and how do individuals recapture agency over their own lives in a way that they don't become passive, in the way that I think all of you highlighted that passivity is quite dangerous for individuals. So we'll just run down the gamut. So Beth, you're all first.
It feels like school, though. I turned up late and I have to answer the question. Sorry, I'm not a robot yet. I had to rush off. Yes, okay, power dynamics. So what I think is really inspiring already is that we can see people at the grassroots level using narrative and imagery to push back against the dominant narratives around where AI is going and who should be in charge of it and who should be in control. I don't think we should ever underestimate the positive virality of grassroots movements utilizing their networks and sharing particular ideas. We should also not underestimate the younger generations, which are also coming up with their own ways of pushing back. I was having some very interesting conversations over lunch about teenagers' responses in particular and how they're heading up to the university level and not wanting ubiquitous AI, unlike a lot of university leadership assumes that they will want. So in the sense of how people are parodying and making fun of AI, calling AI slop, for things AI slop that are not necessarily AI slop, but dismissing it, we can see a lot of that kind of activism happening already. There's a really great website that I think of as a good example of this called Save the AI, which is presented as a charity website in favor of AIs, pointing out that you humans are all using too much electricity, too much water, and you need to curtail yourself to enhance the AI's possibility of living. And this is all to point out the dangerous environmental and sustainability issues of AI. So that kind of approach, I think, is one way that people can take back the power.
Thank you. I would point to the need to recover courage in the public debate and the awareness that we are all entitled to take part in this debate as people and citizens. We don't have to be experts in AI to do it, but these matters affect all of us, and also to really believe deeply that all of our traditions have got something very important to contribute to this debate, and not to be disempowered by that. So it's courage and confidence, I think, which are vital.
I would say that to remember that politicians and tech people are humans too, and actually to try and find sort of people's voices within the context that they work and operate. So, you know, to find politicians who are sympathetic towards the agenda that Faith has, and sort of allow them to sort of express that.
I think that's the first time somebody said in a conference that politicians are humans too.
I would say two things. One is that regulation, that can help to reduce the power imbalance. And to do that, I think we need to have transparency. We need to be able to understand how the technology works. And think today how many people knew how the technology works. Even I don't fully know. I've tried to explain it, but do we really know how it works? How can we regulate the technology, and how can we make sure it's human-centric if we don't know how it works? At the moment, lots of it seems to be trade secrets. And then the other thing I would say is perhaps there are some practical things we could do. When motor vehicles came, we had seat belts, and that was a regulation. Could we have something like that for AI? When somebody's having a conversation with AI, maybe it should be forced to say, this is a machine you're talking to, every time it replies, or something like that. I'm not saying definitely that's just an idea, but there's probably some practical things that could easily be done.
I think the word power is a tough one. My mind immediately goes to the degree to which we allow something or someone to have power over us. I can walk out in the rain and let that bother me. I can also attempt to walk out into a hurricane and be immediately pushed back. So AI is probably somewhere in between hurricane and rain. But I think for me, the most important thing to consider is whether, to echo regulations, whether our regulations are still allowing people to respond by choice. So will any form or any part of AI be forced upon us in an academic environment or in a government environment, or will AI be forced into religious institutions who choose to not embrace it? I think the institutional level of choice is important. I think the individual level of choice is important. And I think regulation will have to play a part of that to preserve it.
Yes, well, I would say two things. I would amplify and concur with my two colleagues here in relation to regulation. I think it's interesting that many of the sort of, move fast and break everything up people who are driving some of this stuff are libertarian and don't believe in any form of regulation. And I think the seatbelt analogy is a very good one, but there's loads of them from an ordered society. And we don't speak up enough for the value of regulation, and yet we all expect to have our medicines made properly and our planes to work and so on. I speak as somebody who's, biased in this regard, because my day job is as the Chief Medical Officer to Ireland's mental health regulator. And certainly I can point to you the benefits of having a regulator in the mental health space, no question about it. So I really do think that the power imbalance partly is because many of these forces seem to be beyond our agency to insist as the demos that there is regulation. But the other point I wanted to make was about power imbalance, Charlie, in the sense that somebody said to me that there is a new poor, there's a new rich, relatively. The new rich, relatively, are people who have Wi-Fi. Now, we might think we all have Wi-Fi. We're all in the Wi-Fi space. But there's millions of people who are not, PC-led and, driven by a mobile phone. These people will not be included in the conversation. I'm talking about people, for example, who are ill. Of course, I'm talking about the mentally ill as well. Many of whom are obviously perfectly well able to use a phone, but the exclusion of being somehow of agency. What about the power of people who don't appear in the way we look at the world to have agency? They need to be included in this conversation. Now, that's a compassionate sentiment, and it's one that could be easily mocked as condescension or Gra McCree, we'd say in Ireland, so naive love. But it's not naive, because unless we include those who aren't able to demonstrate to the developers of these things that they are of agency, then whole swathes of humanity will be excluded from this conversation, and with great consequences for them. So I really think it's incumbent somehow on making those who have agency realize that it's not just about making sure their agency for themselves has impact, but their agency it respects those who in the eyes of the powerful don't appear to have agency.
So on power, what strikes me is, even though these companies are developing these systems and it seems very much outside of our hands, if we are going to use AI, we actually often could be contributing to training the models, and there's ways to opt out of that. You say, for example, I know ChatGPT better, so you can say it won't. Now, maybe they're lying, but they're meant to not train if you click a certain button, but it's hidden in the system. And then sometimes they give you A/B choices. If you actually select the A/B choice, you might think you're not being trained on. As soon as you select A/B of those two options, that whole conversation becomes trainable. So there's things like this that people should be aware of, bring awareness to people about that. Another thing that strikes me on this about training and so on is the Stack Overflow case, if you've heard of this. So it's a website for kind of programming queries, etc. And it really, a lot of the reason AI is so good at these things is because it trained on all of that forum. And then the forum dropped, and now it's basically dead, apparently. So, AI has now successfully sort of eaten the host, and there is no more Stack Overflow where humans are making up new solutions.
Question yet?
The ethical issue around AI, which is getting most publicity at the moment, and rightly, is the danger to employment, and particularly to the employment of the young, those coming out of school and university. And this is real for me because I have 2 grandsons, just graduated, can't get jobs. What should corporations, government, or even we do about it?
Who would like to jump in first on that?
Can I start?
Yeah.
So those are 3 very different groups with 3 very different aims, and even within those groups, you're talking about, when you say governments, there's governments in different places have different agendas. So, for instance, regulations come up a couple of times. The US tried to pass a bill to prevent, a part of that bill was to prevent any regulation of AI in any state. And there was pushback from both the Democrats and the Republicans, but that attempt will happen again. So when you say what should we do at those different levels, you've got to be very aware of the different contexts and different aims and ambitions. The UK, on the whole, is all in on the development of these technologies and trying to take our place in the world in the development of these technologies. The government has been a part of that conversation in many different spaces about accelerating, about progress, about making sure that AI is developing in a particular direction, and the ethical questions are not raised as often as they should be at that level. So again, as I said, grassroots influence might be the way in which we shift the conversation. If the cultural context changes and people are more, on the whole, against AI in the discussion, that will influence policy. At the moment, I don't see a lot of deontological top-down ethical regulation or ideas about how to improve the fates of our children. I also have a 14-year-old son. We're having the same sort of conversations. He loves technology, but some of the things he's trying to do in like Blender animations will be replicable quite easily through prompting situations. So does he have a future with that? Do I encourage that? Do I not? These are the kinds of questions that we don't have very simple answers for, because we can't really predict to the extent that those aims and ambitions of those different groups will end up aligning or contrasting with each other. If governments and corporations want to seek this overall efficiency, that will have the impact of taking away or underemploying people in the future. So it's not an easy answer by any means.
Working for a very large business and having worked for other ones, and not speaking in an official capacity for any of them, but quite frankly, when it comes up, it's not an ethical question, nor do I believe it should be an ethical question for a for-profit organization. The moment it becomes an ethical question, I think you get into the gray area of government. Well, if you're a capitalist, government superimposing more than they ought to in the conducting of business. But it does come up. The topic comes up, and it comes up for me particularly as well. And the way that it does is in a question of sustainability. And in this case, I'm not talking about environmental sustainability, although that's important. I'm talking about the sustainability of our business, which is a people business, to exist in 5 years or 10 years. And when I see trends in smaller incoming classes out of university into the firm, I worry about who will replace me? So if I believe personally that I'm in a role that can't be replaced by AI yet, but I need a human to replace me, how do I get the humans into the organization to give them the training that they will need to then do my job? And if we stop hiring at the bottom out of the university, I can't rely on hiring externally from other organizations to do all the training of those people for me. So for me, it's a sustainability question, not an ethical one. And from my observation, I haven't seen companies figure this out. The last 18 months have been, let's freeze, let's slow down, and they may ramp up again. But right now, everybody's in an I don't know situation.
Okay, we'll go Bishop Stephen and then Jim.
Thank you. It's an important and complex question. And I don't think there will be a simple answer. Of course, it's got something to do with retraining and equipping, and something to do with affirming the value of work along the lines that Harris was talking about earlier and so on. But I don't think we should underestimate the value of human creativity or overestimate the computers and AI's creativity. So my oldest son works in the computer games industry in the UK at a relatively senior level. And I've been surprised at his perspective on AI in coding and games, where you would have thought that AI would be doing quite a lot. Actually, his perspective is the AI is not very good at coding creatively yet. And most games, in my observation of that enormous industry, emerge from groups of friends playing together and having ideas. And it's the human spark of ingenuity which is the difference between a routine game and the other game. And I think we're seeing it a lot with film and television now, with the streaming services, that actually we're seeing a lot more middle band generated comedies or films which lack genius and which are not yet as creative as the human ones. And personally, I hope that's permanent.
Okay. Jim?
Yes, I thank you, Charles. I would echo the Bishop's comments. I mean, obviously it's a huge problem, but to go back to the simplistic reductionism I gave, I think we need to exercise our hippocampi here, which are not just compassionate, they're creative and imaginative. The human capacity for that is vast. I have 4 graduate children and 1 still in A-level, but they tell me the jobs they'll be doing haven't been imagined yet, Dad. And I think that's kind of youthful and positive as well. And it probably is true. Certainly things are going to disappear. My difficulty is, will the powerful who have, 95% of all the world's wealth, will they allow the collective ingenuity of the rest of humanity to burst through and to bring a justice to that? Because at the moment, there's an imbalance that I think the powerful will want to maintain. So I've no doubt humanity can survive, thrive, and overcome and benefit from these new innovations. I'm more concerned about the willingness of those who currently are advantaged by the current situation to make it possible for your graduate kids to do the work that they enjoy, that'll bring out their humanity. We don't want people going down the mines or up chimneys again. I don't want to return to that. But supposing they were able to do imaginative imagery in a unique way, would somebody be prepared to sponsor that, to buy it, value it? Does it matter if they do that? How would society be organized? Will we be effectively all on a kind of social security doing our own imaginative things for nothing? Who knows? But it becomes a political decision. In the end, though, we mustn't lose faith in our ability to be creative, imaginative. And one thing sure, if we end up with one strand of humanity, the super rich, running everything, we'll be diminished.
Harris?
So on the introduction of AI into the workplace, I do think it is an ethical issue. I think it goes to dignity. on the one hand. And I also think there's an aspect of social cohesion. And so what I would like to see is more consultation between those in power in businesses and the workers, and to try and have buy-in. And you talk about business cases. I guess having that kind of buy-in preserves that as well. In terms of goodwill of the employees, and that I suppose also brings into play the kind of creativity and the group collaboration aspect that we've mentioned as well.
Very good. Yep.
Just briefly, I remember a few years ago there was a government campaign saying like "learn to code," and it was quite criticised. And it seems that already that's completely out of date advice. So this is the nature we're in. We don't know where it's going to end up. So pragmatically, I think it's a good idea for young people to, one, invest in developing themselves as human beings. So it's back to an older model of education, where what is this doing to make you a more flourishing, adaptable, intelligent, compassionate person. So all of those things we've been saying. And then in terms of like the job that you're envisaging, of course, we don't know everything, but it seems that any job involving dealing face-to-face with human beings is going to be much more adaptable than anything that involves sitting in front of a machine. So I would advise young people to not learn to code, but in fact, learn to engage with people in whatever way. It could be teaching, it could be health, it could be so many things. But the idea, I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm completely wrong, I kind of like the utopian vision of it, but the idea that everyone will just be artists just doesn't sound like the way things are going to go. So, if I'm going to be a bit more hard-nosed, I wouldn't just say, just develop your personal expression, but do look at where you might be able to be useful to human beings. Yeah.
Very good. Any further questions from the audience? Yes, go ahead. I'll just borrow that for a minute.
I just wanted to ask for your thoughts around accountability, because that's a key part of faith. And at the same time, that's what's lacking in technology, and which is a good thing. Because to Ammon, your point, we can't imagine an AI CEO being summoned. But then let's say hypothetically they are, then what do we punish them with? What's the punishment for an AI? So that means it has to end or start with a human, and the accountability needs to be traced back. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about the future on this? Because at the end of the day, AI is there to stay, as you said, but we almost need, like the seatbelt analogy, not just regulation and fear of accidents, but also that annoying beeping noise that the car makes when you don't put the seatbelt on. So how do we embed that in technology? And if not, how do we ensure there is accountability for these?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question, and there have been some excellent scholars who have been arguing, people like Joanna Bryson, that some of the natural tendency towards anthropomorphization that we have that is being hacked by corporations is to get around that accountability issue, that the more we think of AI as an agent, the less we'll go, oh, well, this was a corporate decision at the end of the day, or this was the decision of an individual CEO leader who decided this. So for instance, I think it's Tesla, I'm pretty sure it's Tesla. In some instances, the automated system turns off just before accident, so the accountability goes back to the human in the last few seconds. So that kind of scheming around accountability to make sure it's not placed on the corporation, it's either placed on the AI or the human, is something we have to be really, really aware of. But education on how that operates and how it works is not happening at the lowest levels and all the way through the schooling system. Instead, anthropomorphism, as I said, is being pushed onwards. Like, it happens anyway, and then people are being encouraged further. So Bryson's argument is this obscures the accountability of the corporation. Again, regulation is a really difficult topic, but one thing people have suggested to get around this is Turing red flags. So every time you interact with an AI, it should tell you that it's an AI. again, the anthropologist in me wants to say, yes, but you can tell someone it's an AI and they'll still believe it's more than that. So the examples I was giving earlier. So we don't have a functional mechanism for curtailing people's anthropomorphism when it's going to be hazardous to them or result in this loss of accountability or the right placing of accountability.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd agree with all of that, and also highlight the importance of governance in all of this. So, as it were, from the other side, many of us will be exercising governance roles in different organisations, faith communities, charities, and it's really vital that in every sector there is high-level accountability for governance of AI within organisations, which is often communicated through policies, but also traceable back. And I think much of the faith and charity sector is behind the curve on the need to develop this good governance, and perhaps one of the areas where this project and others like it can contribute is benchmarking what good governance looks like in the charity and faith and public sector for AI.
Just thinking as a lawyer here about accountability in terms of let's take the CEO robot. Well, the company is a legal personality. So if people had suffered damage, then they would pursue the company for financial damage, presuming that would be the relief that's being sought. I could imagine some legal provision also for some kind of disclosure as to what went wrong, if there was something very serious. For example, something like the post office scandal, and some maybe permission to the court or power to the court to grant some relief, which involves readjusting the program to deal with any faults that have been identified. But I'm thinking in that sort of way.
I would just add to that I've heard people have ideas of having a black box inside the AI that records in the same way there's a black box inside an aircraft, so that when there's a crash of the aircraft, you collect the box and can try and identify what had gone wrong. But the problem with that, with AI models, could be that the model's going to deliberately record something in there that wasn't what it did, because there's already some evidence of AI models, when they know they're being evaluated, doing a thing called sandbagging, where they deliberately show that their performance is lower than what it actually is, and things like that. So, yeah.
I think that from a corporate standpoint, any sort of accountability needs to be paired properly with the expectation of usage of AI. I was talking with my brother-in-law on Sunday about the AI platform that's been put in place in his company, and it was more than strongly encouraged, but not quite mandated, to where it started to put pressure on employees that if they didn't use it and couldn't prove that they used it, then that would be damaging to their performance review. And yet there was nothing about accountability for what happens when I do this and I lose the sale. Am I still accountable as the employee? So that was the missing counter to the push to use it, was help me understand at what point you, the company, are taking responsibility for what you've asked me to do. And so I think that's at least one balancing mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in awe of all the comments that have been made. But in the question of accountability, in addition, I'd just like to express the feeling that holding anyone to account in this area becomes very difficult. And I really like what the Bishop was saying, that if we're in communities, faith organizations, whatever we're doing, each of us in our own places must look at governance. But I'm struck by how, at a bigger level, this is being played out, so that even nations now can't hold these enterprises to account. Look at what Australia is trying to do now, and I think it's going to happen maybe here, banning something, which is obviously beyond a space that they really control. So and already seems to be an ineffectual measure. The nation, as a body with the ability to hold something to account, seems, very, very weak in comparison to the original organization. So I really think there's an issue about democracy here. We need to make sure that this doesn't end up with very simplistic shifts left and right, with bans here and bans there, and yet in reality, no actual holding the powerful to account. And I think it will actually have a major bearing on the nature of the sustainability of the idea that, what did Roosevelt say, you know, it's based on the wish that 51% of the time the people will get it right. And it is a wish, but actually it's very, very fragile now when you've got all this influence altering the way in which nations are forming their governments around it. So I think each of us as a voter, and we live in free countries with democracy, really need to make sure we don't fall into the trap of simplistic right or left-wing solutions. And that's one way we need to.
So on this issue of accountability, I think it's interesting that in the field of social epistemology, there's ideas of kind of vulnerable dependence. So the idea that as epistemic agents, as those seeking to know, we often can consider ourselves, we're vulnerable upon those we gain our testimony from. And so AI, you can see AI as like a kind of testimonial source. You plug in and you get information out. But unlike a human being, where there's this accountability in providing testimony, you know, this person, this academic stands up to this view and they've staked their reputation, they're going to be cited. AI is just this kind of amorphous blob that gives you back something, and they write at the bottom, it may be wrong. But people often don't treat it as something that might be wrong, and it might be right. It can be very clever sometimes. And so I think we don't have a reliable way of treating AI like a regular testimonial agent, but yet as human beings, we're kind of conditioned to treat something that spits us out answers like a testimonial agent. And that's a problem for us. And we need to solve that problem if we're going to deal with this. So I think that's one of the problems at the root of some of what's going on.
Question ahead.
So as a philosopher who works on the risks of AI, I think it makes sense to think about the ways in which AI can make our lives worse, right? That it can create a loss of well-being or lead to greater division. But I also think that oftentimes the conversation comes back to what does it mean to be human, right? So that's something that was echoed through many of the talks today. And I was wondering if you saw any kind of danger underpinning that, the interest in that question. Why do we take our specialness to be so important and threatened by other things? Like, do you think that reveals something maybe problematic in the way in which we understand the value of being human? That it's something that could be taken away, or something that like could be threatened by something else?
Who wants to jump in first?
Really helpful question. But yes, I do. I think there is a fragility to our humanity, which is an essential part of our humanity, as is our mortality and finiteness. And alongside that, there is our capacity to do harm and a fundamental tendency to mess things up that we have as humans. So all of that means the need for safeguarding and protection in new technologies, such that our fragility is protected and we're able to flourish and grow. So I think all of that stems from a fundamental fragility in the human condition.
Jim?
Yeah, I agree with the Bishop completely, but it comes back to those two sides to us. We have survived because of our defensive capacities. No question about that. We've become very aggressive. And that's because our survival matters. So there have been loads of threats, and there will be more threats. And presumably AI, if it is a threat, it's just one of many to come. And we need to have a defensive system. What I think inherent to what you're saying is maybe we should be conscious of the fact that our defensiveness might also do us some harm. And that's true. But I think that the jury is out as to how much jeopardy we're under now. And from my mind, I think people are actually very, very fearful. And the way forward isn't to say, there's no worry, there's not an issue there. The way forward is to enhance also our human capacity to create and engage with solutions. And that's very, very hard for most people, I would say, who are not actually able to determine how this goes, where we are passive. So I think there is an inherent fragility in what but I think minimizing it may not be helpful either.
We'll do Beth, then Harris, then Emma.
I'll send it down afterwards, I promise. So I think that's a really valuable question, because there is a certain danger that is noted by some scholars, that anthropocentrism becomes anthrochauvinism. And there is a certain, you can open it up to critical post-human perspectives and even colloquial post-human perspectives to say, would we be having the same kinds of conversations? If a UFO landed and aliens walked out and started talking to us, would we also go, this threatens what it means to be human? Or if one day animals which are getting closer and closer to showing the things that we reify as intelligence, I just saw the other day cows are using tools, amazing. If the uplift of the animal mind happened to the extent that they could communicate, we've got AI being used to translate whale song at the moment. Whether it's accurate or not is a question. So if we open up our cosmology of potential beings, does that diminish us as humans, or does it just make us richer for having more intelligences to communicate with? That's not me positing that AI is definitely going to be that thing. It's just a space that's useful for conversation and thought experiments. And I'm a sci-fi geek, so I want to talk about aliens. There we go.
Harris?
Okay, I think that's a great question. Here's a question, right? How do we stop wars, right? There's two solutions which I think are fail-proof, right? One of them is we kill all human beings once and for all, or be no wars, or we just don't have any kids. And when we start engaging with thought experiments like that, one appreciates firstly how every religion actually puts front and center human dignity and the special nature of human beings. But actually there's something inherent within us that does that too. And I'm thinking here of Spinoza, who has this concept of conatus, right? The idea that we have within us, or the desire to self-preserve, to preserve ourselves, and some have translated that as flourishing. If we take that as a given, either psychologically or by virtue of revelation or both, then we have to work to preserve the human being. And I think that is a concept worth fighting for, and I do think there's lots of threats in relation to that. And there's political threats, technological threats, and we have to always be very mindful and vigilant and to preserve our humanity. And I don't think that means to say that we can't respect other minds, however they show up, even if it's in a context of an AI. But I think we have to fight for our own uniqueness. That doesn't mean we're the best necessarily in every single sphere.
Alan?
So, in my field, I'm a patent attorney, so I'm protecting inventions. And there's lots of debate at the moment because AI tools are being used by humans to create inventions. So then there's a question of should a patent be awarded? Has the human contributed enough to the invention, or was it the AI tool? At the moment, the law says you have to have a human inventor, otherwise you can't have a patent. So this is a sort of threat to the humanness. So it's an example of a threat to what it means to be human, I think. Yep.
I think we can ask the question. I think we should be allowed to ask the question, and the reason why is anytime you look in human history and you see where the objective function, as I call it, for individual life is different from the collective objective function, then the individuals with freedom have the ability to push back. So you have tyrants and dictators and other things where the system collectively doesn't work for the individual, and they push back and try to change. In this case, I think the collective is not just the immediate collective, but the future collective. Is the objective function for my life that I'm trying to optimize, is that the same as what I think people in the future will be trying to optimize? Is it the same as what AI companies are trying to optimize? I'd argue it's definitely not. Is it the same as what collective institutions of faith are trying to optimize for their practitioners? I think that one is a lot closer. For me, it's just very simply, what's the objective function for the people who are involved? And if it doesn't work for maximizing or optimizing their objective function, they get to ask and push back on all the questions they want, including, hey, I'm important and I should be preserved. And I should be able to think about my children and their future being preserved. So maybe that's a little bit of a less emotional response, but it happens to match my emotional response too, which is absolutely, I'm going to ask that question.
Ramon, do you have any?
No, I
Yeah, just to say that it's quite understandable that human beings would feel threatened by this. If you think about, there's a famous saying, that so many animals are stronger or faster, and the one thing that humans were saying is, we have this intelligence, we can use this intellect, and now, obviously, with all the caveats we like to make, AI has this cleverness in some way, and so it is a threat. It is a threat to humans, whether or not for bracket the whole conscious discussion that I mentioned, just on what it can do and what it's likely to be able to do, it does threaten us, and I think that we're coming to terms with that in lots of ways, and I don't think there's hope has gone yet, but it is a serious moment.
Yeah. Now we've got, we'll take two together, so Myra and then Deb. I borrow that for a minute.
It touches on what you were saying, and I'm interested for the people who work in corporates. Corporates want optimization, they want more profits. What questions do you think leaders should be asking themselves and for their corporates about flourishing? Is it even important? Or is it only important so that you can have more profits and more optimization? Or is there a place for humans to flourish independently in the organization and in their work? And what questions should organizations be asking themselves around that?
So my point is a little bit different. In a few of the presentations we've touched upon, being human is about learning, about pursuing curiosity, accumulating, engaging in knowledge. And I think that maybe this isn't something that we've discussed, but when we're talking, even questions about power this relates to, is that what we see from the data of how people are using systems is that often they are using it in a way to learn. It's kind of learning without judgment, that you can get this kind of discussion back and forth. And also, we've heard lots of anecdotal stories here as well today. I think I've also heard lots of anecdotal stories about people using AI systems to help them understand a field better, ask questions of professionals that previously they may not have felt confident to ask. So I'm interested in how that kind of power dynamic of people using AI in different ways plays out. And just to touch on it, some recent research looked at actually patterns of use from AI systems, and the kind of top subjects were things that are very human. They were kind of health and advice, work, technology, language and learning. So I think it's interesting what we can learn from what we see about the nascent interactions and data that we're getting from AI use.
So Ramon, you might start off. You're the most corporate of us all.
I think it comes down to the start of the employment relationship. If that is ignored in the question or answering the discussion, then it drives a circular argument of, why is the corporation responsible for helping the human flourish? Are they responsible for employing them in the first place? So again, you go back to, how did the employment contract begin? Whatever the terms of that employment contract are, I absolutely see companies like mine, many, taking a very genuine and active interest in helping humans flourish, because as part of the employment contract, that was part of the value proposition. I think where it starts to go sideways is where the presumption is that the employment should be indefinite, irrespective of the productivity. That, somehow now, because you're in the four walls of my company, I'm responsible for taking care of your mental health and your physical health and making sure you have a job, and if your job gets eliminated, finding you another one. That starts to get into whatever political leanings people might have, that just raises a whole bunch of questions we haven't really meaningfully tackled globally yet, or at least in different ways than we've seen it historically. But I'm quite impressed to see how many corporations, even if the motivation is for publicity, how many are genuinely putting in place activities and programs to help their employees have a rich experience. Again, it's because healthy, happy employees result in better work. So you can't ignore that. But I definitely see it happening. To the other question, and maybe this isn't quite getting at what you were saying, but I do see, in the same way that I talked earlier about the risk of AI having an impact on the development of faith in a bifurcated way for those who are prepared for it and those who aren't. I definitely see that in the workplace. You see a growing divide between the people who actively use AI and use it regularly in ways to exponentially increase their output compared to people who are still not sure they want to use it. It's the people who are exponentially using it that are going to replace the people who don't. It's not AI per se, it's the people with AI. And that's a hard thing to teach. Do you teach that through training on using a chat product, or do you go back to teaching what it is that made that other person more capable in the first place? That's a tricky thing to pin down.
I'd add to that. Sorry. I'd add to that a little bit, because both questions go to motivations, don't they? Corporate motivation, individual motivation. And I'm not so sure that I can comment about corporate. I mean, profit, I suppose, is the only motivation for a corporation, really, and that's fine. No margin, no mission. But human motivation is surely about more than that. It's not just about acquiring more knowledge or more facility or more skill or more wealth. There's an expression in many languages, I know there is in the Gaelic language, it goes something like, you know, if my neighbor's hungry, my chickens aren't safe. And we are part of collective no matter what we're in. And if AI does something to create a new advantaged group at the peril of others, what would be the good of that, really? It's another profit tool, perhaps. So I think if there's a hope for AI, and we have to argue for some good of it, it has to benefit far more than just the people who catch on early on, like some kind of pyramid scheme. And I'm not so sure that there's evidence of that at all at the moment. It seems to be very isolative, individualist, and isolating an experience to be in the AI world. It's not collective, societal that I've seen, and it won't actually replace or match humanity at its best unless it becomes something that engages in our collective experience, our social experience, to the benefit of us.
Bishop Stephen?
I think, just to complement the very good things that have been said, I think probably most of us are used to working in organizations which do intuitively think about developing people. But I think we need to take note of, particularly through AI, the growth of the gig economy and the increasing numbers of people who find that they are working for robots and AIs, Uber drivers, delivery drivers, and so on. And are disempowered because of the rapid development of the technology from reflecting back their conditions, and often are so stretched that there isn't any space for development. And I think there is therefore a responsibility on wider society to take note of that, lest we see the development of a different kind of slavery in the future, where people are instrumentalized in order to serve the profits of companies and machines. And that's a real downside of this technology.
I would just quickly add to that, you say in the future, but it's already here, it's here. And also the gig economy doesn't just apply to people whose decision-making is taken away and given to an algorithm. It can also apply to people who are like 0-hour contracts, academia, like experience area. In particular, we know the neoliberalization of the university around the world is causing similar problems. So just adding to your excellent points.
I mean, this conversation reminds me of a kind of online meme about I've got 1 year to escape the permanent underclass. Like the idea that the ladder will be pulled up, and anyone who's not made it when AI gets to a certain point, you're just forever below that point. And the other point that is interesting, I think, is that it seems that while AI is being ubiquitously put into education, maybe, or there's a risk of that, or into work, people at the very top will maybe want to keep their children free of AI and train them in the most kind of AI. It's just like the same thing with social media, where the social media founders don't actually give social media to their families. And so, and then what will actually be, I've got a colleague, his view is that the elite education will be completely free of any AI, but then at the end, you'll get the training in AI, so you can then get that extra value boost with the AI after having learnt, without all the, because AI, a top up, so you can use the AI on top of those of us who've grown up without an AI education, we've already got that. But it's worrying for the younger generation when they're wanting to use these tools, and if the tools short circuit their problem solving abilities. So, just some scattered thoughts.
Any further thoughts on the panel, Harris?
Just picking up this question about people being empowered. That's really interesting. That it's correct. Of course, people who didn't have a voice perhaps are then finding it. But I was thinking about Jim uses this term about the brain being a mediator in his beautifully poetic speech. And in a sense, AI is becoming a mediator. If you think about your scenario, someone writes a letter using AI. Someone receives that letter, puts it into ChatGPT, gets a response, goes back through, that of course then it's gone through AI as well. So everything is being, perhaps, if everyone's going to be right, everything is acting as a mediator, and it's shaping everything, a bit like God in a sense. And this leads into Beth's subject.
Great. Well, we have time for one absolutely last question from the audience. Are there any further comments or observations? Well, if not, I will take advantage of the chair. One of the speakers earlier today, I'm an economist by background, so whenever somebody quotes John Maynard Keynes, I get very excited. The economic possibilities of our grandchildren was quoted, and it always reminds me of a joke related to the American baseball player Yogi Berra, which says, people are terrible about predictions, especially about the future. One of the things that I think possibly could be more important for the conversation from an economist's point of view is the work of Elisabeth Ostrom and the fact that there's profound coordination failures and problems that exist, because much of what our panel has discussed relate to things that go beyond the national domain. And even beyond the regional domain, beyond the capacity of entities like the European Union, and reminds me of when we created a new, possibly humanity-destroying technology, such as nuclear weapons, that we tried to create a new method of coordination. In the same way, when we were aware that we were destroying fish stocks, and that's where Elisabeth Ostrom's work on the tragedy of the commons, received a Nobel Prize, about creating those coordination moments where we realize this is a problem that is bigger than us, and going back to the time horizon issues, which people were highlighting, the time horizon of quarterly profits versus, again, the social and physical possibilities of our grandchildren. And that we actually, in the words of Kennedy, we all breathe the same air, we all value our children's futures, and we all inhabit this same small planet. And I think that is something which came across very clearly, and that's manifested in all the speakers. And I know Harris has mentioned it, Jim mentioned it, Bishop Stephen mentioned it, and Alma mentioned it, about the idea of human dignity. And that dignity and human flourishing is just a very good foundation point for the conversation to continue to happen. So at this point, it just turns to me to recommend you to buy Elisabeth Ostrom's book on coordination problems and to do the maths, but also to thank our speakers and our panelists today for their wonderful contributions and for their generosity of their time and their intellect. And the phrase which I copied out from the Pope's latest missive on AI was that the perfection of persons is not measured by the information they possess, but by the depth of their charity. And that is something which I think we can have as a takeaway for today about when thinking and discussing AI. And I therefore turn you over then to the very capable hands of Malcolm. Thank you.